Hi and welcome to the latest Go Ballistic transfer special. Focusing on Celtic today, and with myself, Ryan Rowe, we've got David Friel here from the Scottish Sun. Celtic are on the verge of completing a few signings. The one that looks as though it's closest to being announced, Callum Osmand from Fulham.
Yeah, I think it's all in the bag, Ryan. Understand, I think everything's been agreed. Also, it's going to be a cross-border compensation thing. I don't think terms. I was talking about medical the other day. I think it's all in the bag. I think it's just a case of when it's going to be announced, and Callum Osmand potentially could become, after Kieran Tierney, a Celtic player.
So, I mean, we can rattle off all these stats. 10 goals in 17 games in PL2. That's Premier League 2, the Youth Development Reserve League, what have you, for down south. He's played in the EFL Trophy, 18 goals across all competitions, and got a nomination for Player of the Season in PL2. But if he's the only striker that Celtic signed this season, are you disappointed as a Celtic fan?
But he's not going to be the only striker, I don't think, that Celtic will sign. So, yeah, look, I get that there's a bit of, how can I put this? People asking, is he going to be the third striker? Is he going to be one that goes and plays with the first team and asked to really step up? I think that would be very unfair, and I don't actually think that's the plan anyway. Brendan Rodgers, I'm assuming, will speak about this when Callum Osmand does become a player. He clearly, I mean, the stats that you rhyme off there, Ryan, it just screams potential. You know, it screams a guy, young striker, hungry, ambitious. He's got Wales youth caps. Also well rated at Fulham. I think Fulham were keen to keep him. I think they'd offered him a deal. Marco Silva, the boss, had talked him up. So he screams to me as someone who has a next step in him. I think he'll come in. I think he'll do pre-season with Celtic. Brendan Rodgers, if you actually look back over the years, remember with Chris Ayer, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I think Chris Ayer stayed at Celtic for a few months before going out on loan, because I think Brendan Rodgers really wanted him to get into the habit of training with the team, learning from the players, the senior players, going up against them, training every day, as opposed to just maybe going and training with a team at maybe a lower level and not getting as many minutes because you're so raw and so young. So I just wonder where he'll stick about for a wee while before maybe getting loaned out down the line. But yeah, look, I get it that there's a lot of Celtic fans out there saying, is this the third striker? Is this? I think in time, Callum Osmand could definitely become a Celtic first team striker. I just don't think the club, Brendan Rodgers, will put too much pressure on that at this moment in time.
Another signing that's fairly close, and you've been across this for quite a while now, Benjamin Nygren, £1.7 million, 6 months left in his contract. Looks like a good bit of business.
Yeah, I think it is. Look, we had the story, it then kind of accelerated. There's been a lot of talk since about transfer fees and all that sort of stuff. Look, the price was the price. As we spoke about last week in the transfer special, he's got 6 months left in his deal at Nordsjælland, where we spoke about how sensible they were, common sense to use. Look, the price was the price, €2 million, £2 million, 1.7, whatever, that around about that ballpark. It was never going to be haggled down or up. I don't think they weren't going to ask for any more. Clubs weren't going to get him for any less. I think if you look at his status, his profile, it's a snip, it's a steal, call it what you want. So that was never going to be an issue. I think personal terms are not going to be an issue either. I think what's probably holding up the deal, look, it's all about time, it's all about clubs when they want to do deals, when they want to get it through, the buying club, the selling club, the player. He's been on holiday as well. I think he's been maybe in Italy, actually, since, bear in mind he played with Sweden right up until the middle of last week. So he'll be getting an extended break, even as a Nordsjælland player. I mean, they are back for pre-season training. He's not been there. He's been given an extended break. I do think that one will happen. Look, you're never 100% sure until everything is all finalised and you've got the scarf above your head at Celtic Park. But I do think Benjamin Nygren will be a Celtic player.
So Celtic fans, let us know in the comments what you think about those two incomings in terms of Callum Osmand and Benjamin Nygren. How much more do you want in the forward areas? And indeed, as we'll touch on later, there could be players in the forward areas that leave Celtic. But do we expect to see Benjamin Nygren for the first time in the Champions League playoff, or could we see him before then?
No, I think if everything goes to plan, I mean, you look at, I think Celtic are due back some of the players next week. And then I'd imagine the international players will maybe get an extra bit of time. But I would imagine the entire squad will take part in the Cork game to an extent before Celtic go to Portugal for pre-season. So I would imagine that any signings that come in, whether international players or not, will probably be involved, at the very least probably in the second week of pre-season for Celtic. So if Benjamin Nygren, if Celtic can get it over the line, get it all done, I would imagine you will see him in time for that Cork game.
So, talking about outgoings, we'll get on to Nicolas Kuhn in a minute because we believe there is some serious interest in him. We have heard, with any player in good form, Daizen Maeda's name mentioned with a number of clubs, but Celtic have been so good at staying ahead of the curve and getting these players tied down in good contracts. Do we see Daizen Maeda signing some form of extension this summer?
Well, if it's anything to do with Brendan Rodgers and the Celtic board, yes, 100%. Look, Brendan Rodgers was unequivocal. He wants him on a new deal. He thinks he's earned a new deal. He would love to see it happen. I think for Daizen Maeda, I can understand he's in the form of his life. His value, his status will never be higher. I think Brendan Rodgers is always very upfront about stuff like that. He spoke about Celtic having to be agile because you just don't know what's going to land at your doorstep. You know, I think anyone watching Maeda last season, and even for Japan before that, and even Celtic before that, you know, it's almost as if he just arrived last season. He's been a great player for Celtic for the last 2.5 years, even longer probably. But I think what's so striking about him is he can finish, but it's his work rate and it's his pressing, and in the modern game that is such a valuable commodity. So look, there is going to be interest in Daizen Maeda. 100% there will be. I don't think Celtic would sell him unless it went to astronomical levels. I genuinely don't. I think he's far too important. I mean, how do you go and replace a player like that?
So 20 million in January.
No, I think you
Celtic want a club record for that?
I think Celtic would, yeah, but I think he's that valuable, and I do think as well it's his assets, it's how important it is to the team. And Celtic have this Champions League playoff coming up. I think there'll be certain within the Celtic squad. There will be players who are almost untouchables, who Brendan Rodgers will not want to lose before any Champions League playoff. And even if an astronomical bid did come in for Daizen Maeda, I would be stunned if Celtic accepted that before that playoff game. In terms of a new contract, look, I think he's got a lot to consider. He's spoken himself saying that he's got a lot to consider because he's got a young family. Obviously, everybody knows he's just another young baby just before the Scottish Cup final, and there's a lot of travelling back and forth to Japan. I think he's earned the right, like Greg Taylor, to take his time over things. Look, he's still got a few years left in his deal. I don't think Celtic have any rush in terms of a potential, his value really depreciating or anything like that. However, I think it would make good business sense for Celtic to even just get that sort of, and we've seen it so many times with Celtic, you know, you add on an extra year or two, you bump up the wages, you protect yourself, everyone wins because the player gets more money out of it as well. But there's always an understanding that, you know, if a bid comes in maybe down the line next summer, that you would let him go. I would imagine right now that is probably the most likely outcome. That, you know, I can't see Daizen Maeda signing a 7-year Jim McLean style contract to stay at Celtic. However, I could potentially see him signing a small extension, gets a bump up in wages, and then Celtic can maybe revisit this situation down the line. But I think at whatever price, Celtic need to keep him at the very least until this Champions League playoff.
Nicolas Kuhn has attracted interest from back in Germany. Yeah. £15 million seems to be the number that's been bandied about from RB Leipzig, a team that, you know, Rangers and Celtic are actually quite familiar with recently. One, is that a good move for him if it was to happen? Two, is 15 million value in this current market for Nicolas Kuhn? Looking for more than that?
Nicolas Kuhn in the first half of last season, no. Nicolas Kuhn in the second half of last season, or the last few months of last season, probably yes. Look, Celtic paid €3 million for him 18 months ago. I think if you are getting 5 times your money, then it's good business. I don't care what anybody says. Look, along the lines of Daizen Maeda, I think if Celtic were to start their strongest team right now, Nicolas Kuhn would still be in it. I think his form was probably a concern in terms of the way it faded. And I think he's one of these players, Ryan, where when he's good, he's really good, but there can be a fall-off and there's certain games where you think, is that the same player? Look, he's a winger. Wingers can be inconsistent by their very nature. In terms of would it be a good move for him, I think you need to look at all the factors. He is desperate to play for Germany. That's clear. He's made that clear. Yep. I mean, Nicolas Kuhn is... We kind of spoke a lot to him in the first half of the season. The kind of interviews were few and far between after that. But he always maintained that his 2 main career ambitions when he came to Celtic were to play Champions League football, which he's ticked off and done very, very well, and also get into the Germany squad. Now, Julian Nagelsmann has name-checked him, has said that he is looking at him. Obviously, he did very well against Leipzig in the Champions League, did very well against Bayern Munich, to a point in the Champions League as well. And I just wonder whether Nicolas Kuhn would look at his chances with a World Cup 12 months down the line of playing for Germany maybe being heightened by being in Julian Nagelsmann's view right in front of him with RB Leipzig. I'm not saying he's desperate to leave Celtic by any stretch of the imagination. I do think if a big German club, whether it's RB Leipzig or someone else, come in for him, I do think he would probably have a decision to make, because it would be a chance at his age, I think he's 25, to return home to a big club, to play in the Bundesliga, to get a chance, a better chance probably, let's face it, to get into that German side. I think it would hold a lot of appeal for him. I think Celtic are again in a strong position. Is 15 million fair? As I said, it depends what Nicolas Kuhn it is. I would probably be looking for a bit more if I could. However, I think you also need to factor in the fact that if the bid does come in, and I know some of my colleagues in Germany kind of followed up the story and basically have said, yeah, he's on the list. It's a very strange situation with RB Leipzig just now. They don't have a manager. Obviously, Marco Rowe's left. They had a stand-in manager. They have been involved in a saga trying to get the Werder Bremen manager over the line, Ole Werner, I think his name is. It's not happened yet as we speak. I think, speaking to some colleagues in Germany, they want to get that over the line first before really narrowing in and focusing in on the targets. Nicolas Kuhn is one. I think they like Bakayoko at PSV, and they also like Wimmer at Wolfsburg. However, they are going to lose. They've already lost some attackers in the last 18 months. They're going to lose more probably in this window. So it looks as if RB Leipzig will completely reinvent their front line. So I think they'll be in the market for a few attackers, strikers, wingers, call it what you want. And Nicolas Kuhn is definitely a person of interest for them. So I just think it'll be interesting to see how that one pans out. I think, first of all, RB Leipzig will get a manager in place, and then it wouldn't surprise me if a bid is lodged.
So I'm sure Celtic fans will be watching the developments over in Germany. But if Kuhn does go, again, where does that leave the Celtic front line? Because Jota, we may not see until 2026. Yeah. James Forrest isn't getting any younger. We have said that before. Could we then see an issue where RB Leipzig becomes your main striker and Daizen Maeda has to go back out wide if Kuhn leaves?
I don't think that would be... I don't think Brendan Rodgers would have any issue with that. But I also think it's no coincidence that Celtic are looking at a lot of wingers.
Yep.
You know,
We've got Nygren still to come in.
A to Z of wingers. Ben Nygren or Benjamin Nygren should come in, and then Celtic are clearly looking at other wingers and have been for the last couple of windows. Like, you still get James Forrest there, you still get Yang there.
Lewis Palmer, we still don't know.
Palmer, I think he'll probably go, but you do have options, as you said. You've got Daizen Maeda can play left, right. RB Leipa's there as well. Will there be other strikers? Will there be other attackers? So look, I think it's a kind of bit of a fluid situation. There's a lot of stuff going on, but as I said to you, with this Champions League playoff, Celtic will never ever leave themselves short. It's too big a game. So I think everything in terms of the timing has to be right in any outgoings. And I think Celtic, if you look at the way they do their business, is try and focus on the incomings, and then they'll say, Brendan Rodgers, I'm sure, will sit down and say, right, if there are bids for players, can we be agile enough to say, right, okay, we'll take that because we've got somebody else lined up. But I look at it, Celtic will be scouring Europe, probably globe right now, for attacking reinforcements.
So Celtic fans, let us know, what do you think would be an acceptable bid for Nicolas Kuhn? Is there an acceptable figure this summer? What about January? Moving on to some of the other business, Michel-Ange Balikwisha has been mentioned not just this summer but in previous transfer windows as well. And the name's not going away.
No.
What does that mean?
I think it means that there is clearly an interest. As I said, I think we were talking about it last week, I said that it's probably a question of whether Celtic try and push the button on a bid or a deal or anything like that. And I get that, and I'll be honest with you as well, I always think when there's recurring links to players, you start to think, is this ever going to happen? You know, this was one that was maybe 2 years down the line, blah, blah, blah. But Celtic 100% watched him again a couple of months ago. He has had a bad time with injuries. He's a very exciting player. He's a player that I think if it wasn't for his injuries would have had a move somewhere, whether it's Celtic or elsewhere, before now. He can play as a number 10, he can play near wing. He is very quick. By all accounts, his pressing and everything's very good, so he would seem to fit the bill. But I think, as we say, you know, I think Celtic are just weighing up, looking at who they go for at this stage and what winger and how many wingers, and you know, there's a lot to take into consideration. You know, it feels as if everything's almost kind of I don't mean paused just now, but there's been a lot of interest, but I would imagine that there's so much going on behind the scenes in terms of timing and who Celtic go for and potentially what bids come in as well.
Yeah, I mean, as many of you guys might be watching this, if you're lucky enough from your holidays, players have been on holiday too, and there's the Club World Cup, pre-season, all these things are moving, as we say. And speaking of that, Greg Taylor, I think when we spoke last, we were expected to be coming on the next time and almost reviewing Greg Taylor's Celtic career, but as it stands, there's been no movement.
Well, there has been movement. He's been spotted playing keepy uppy in a boat just off a Mallorcan isle. Fair play to him. Yeah, I think he deserves his holiday. Yeah, look, as I say, there's been no update. Look, I think the longer it goes on, it would surprise me if he stayed at Celtic now.
So you definitely see the longer this goes on, it's less likely he stays at Celtic.
I just think if there was, and again, who knows? Look, there could be an 11th hour twist where suddenly everybody comes together, Greg Taylor stays, all that sort of stuff. I'm just not sure. And he's been on holiday just now. I'm not sure in terms of his contract situation. Does his contract officially end June the 30th, for example? And that's what I'm saying. I don't think you can discount the time of year, both for guys like Callum Osmand coming in, Greg Taylor going out. You do wonder if there's dates and timings involved, financial year ends, all that sort of stuff as well. But I would be, as I said all along, I'd be surprised if Greg Taylor stays.
Now, we spoke before about whether you guys would want Kyogo Furuhashi back at Celtic. There's been a bit of a development in his future recently. You've been on record plenty saying that the Rennes transfer never made much sense to you, and he's gone from a 25-30 million pound target for Manchester City to now a potential target for Birmingham City in the Championship. Now, that's no disrespect to Birmingham City, even as a West Brom fan, but they've got money behind them, they've got ambition, and the Championship's a competitive league too, and they've got ambitions to go even beyond that, I'm sure, in the next 5 years. But I don't think that's where he saw himself within the next 5 years.
No, probably not when he left Celtic, but I do look at it and I wonder, given his experience in France, and the fact that maybe the Premier League bids when he was at his absolute peak for Celtic never came in, is Birmingham a good move for him? Or another Championship club? Because I would look at Kyogo and think that playing in the Championship, playing in a good team, he would score a lot of goals, you would imagine. And I don't really see, as things stand, I know there's been a kind of brief link with Brentford and stuff like that. You see, is he going to get better than the top end of the Championship? And as you say, in terms of Birmingham, when I saw the story, I was thinking, really, Kyogo in Birmingham? But the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Because you have Chris Davis, who was Brendan Rodgers' assistant first time around, but then Ange Postecoglou's assistant, who is really familiar with the Scottish market, has plundered the Scottish market. I mean, it was like an SPFL select last year. If you look at the Birmingham team, he's already taken Tomoki Iwata from Celtic. If you can get Kyogo, even on loan, even for a couple of million, I think it would be good business. However, I think when you see that link, you do look, and I would imagine there'll be a lot of people in England and elsewhere saying, wait a minute, I can get Kyogo here for, maybe to drop a level, if you want to call it that. I think there'd be a lot of interest in him, but it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up at a club like that ilk.
Yeah, because I suppose if you look at even like Odsonne Edouard was in great form, you can argue that Kyogo was A, in better form, and B, certainly a different player from Edouard, but he never really kicked on from even Crystal Palace, and his future is now actually completely up in the air, So if Kyogo maybe takes a club that's on the up, who's to say?
That's my point. And if you look at the Championship next season, it's pretty much wide open. There's not I don't think there's a team that's, and maybe Birmingham are one of the ones that will spend the most money. And you look at Ipswich are always going back down, but you look at that and you think, are Birmingham going to spend enough to go and have a real go at it?
And if once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen.
That's what I'm saying. So whether it's Birmingham, whether it's someone else, I would just look at that and say that would be a sensible signing for one of them, because he is someone who I think would relish the Championship and can do very well in the Championship. As you say, it's probably not what he wanted or what he hoped for when he left Celtic to go to Rennes. And I'll mention it again, World Cup next year. Kyogo, if he's playing and scoring, he's got a far better chance of getting in that squad.
Yep, so we'll circle back to Celtic. So some other potential departures. Now, we mentioned very briefly Isaac English coming in. Stephen Welsh will also be returning from his loan at Mechelen in Belgium. English, probably not a first team prospect,
No.
but Stephen Welsh is at that age now where he wants to be playing first team football. Is he maybe one of these potential departures? Is there any others you can see?
No, I mean, the central defensive area is. I mean, to me, you look at it, you can almost Celtic have got 6 centre halves basically, and you can almost split them in two because you've got Cameron Carter-Vickers, Liam Scales, and Austin Trusty, who seem to be the kind of main three. You've then got Stephen Welsh, who spent part of last season at Mechelen. You've got Gustav Lagerbielke, who's out at FC20, and you've got Mike Nawrocki almost just floating about, playing now and again. I actually quite like him. I think he's got something. I think there's clearly a kind of
Still, £4 million, I think.
no, and that's, I do think there's a player there, right? I genuinely do, and I think he's shown that at times. I think you wonder whether he needs a run of games to show that he's robust enough that he can handle the intensity of playing every 3 days and standing up to the different challenges you get at Celtic. 1 minute you're Champions League, next minute you're up against I mean, Kilmarnock have just signed a 6'7" striker. Just before we speak, you're going to be going down there on a plastic pitch playing against it's a different. You need a different skill set for different games at Celtic. I wonder if Mike Nawrocki has really shown that. But Celtic can't let everybody go. We've not really spoken. I know they've looked at a couple of centre half, but we've not really spoken about really, really strengthening that area. I actually think Celtic should go out and sign a no nonsense number one partner for Cameron Carter-Vickers. Whether that will happen or not, we'll see. But I do wonder about Nawrocki. I know there's been loan interest from Poland. Is he better than that? Could he go to a better club than that? Is he one that could go to the Championship in England and really have a good season to then come back with a view to maybe playing at Celtic? Lagerbielke, I think, will go. Stephen Welsh, again, I don't know. Brendan Rodgers likes him. I think he did okay in Belgium, so we'll see what happens in that one. I would imagine Celtic, no matter what happens, will have a minimum, because you've got Dane Murray there as well on the books. I've got a 7 centre half, obviously the injury issues towards the end of last season. But I think Celtic need to carry 5 centre halves. One of them might be a young one. But they'll be interested in all of them, and I suppose that Brendan Rodgers has to just work out who he sees a future for. But I wouldn't imagine Lagerbielke does have a future. So, Celtic fans, as we've said, let us know in the comments, who would you like to see? Are there any names that jump out to you at that centre-half position, or indeed elsewhere in the squad? That's all for us today, but if you stay on the Scottish Sun's YouTube channel, if you're into your horse racing, we've got another inside track with Royal Ascot finishing up today and into tomorrow, so 2 more days of racing down at Royal Ascot. And there's the latest one-on-one Derek McGregor Part 3 with Eric Black.